Most people think danger wears a scowl, raises its voice, or lashes out in anger. But the most dangerous people are the ones who appear calm, kind, even virtuous. In this video, you'll discover the unsettling truth Carl Jung uncovered about shadow projection, persona, and psychic possession. We'll dive deep into the unconscious patterns that mask themselves as goodness, and explore why those who seem the most innocent often carry the darkest distortions within. This is not just about others. It's about the hidden war within ourselves. There is a kind of danger that never raises its voice. It does not snarl or glare or clench its fists. It smiles, it nods. It wears polite eyes and careful words. It moves through the world unnoticed, praised, even admired for its poise, its gentleness, its civility. But underneath that smooth exterior is a storm, a distortion of the psyche so profound that even the person possessed by it cannot see the damage they carry. Carl Jung once wrote that the greatest threat to our world is not the psychopath with a knife, but the one who smiles as they project their disowned darkness onto you, but the one who unconsciously manipulates, distorts, and condemns all in the name of their own unacknowledged shadow. These are not monsters in the typical sense. They are the teachers, the spiritual leaders, the caregivers, the friends who never seem to be wrong. The ones who are always the victim. The ones who wield the language of virtue while hiding from the war within. You see, the most dangerous people are not the obviously broken. They are the ones who appear whole because they've hidden their brokenness so deeply that even they believe in their illusion. But the psyche cannot be deceived forever. What is rejected does not disappear, it retreats. It slips beneath the floorboards of consciousness into the shadow, into that ancient crypt of all that we refuse to see in ourselves. There it festers, there it grows teeth, and in time, it returns not as a whisper, but as projection, as manipulation, as gaslight, as silent cruelty wrapped in righteousness. Every one of us has a shadow. It is the part of the soul that holds what we fear, what we deny, what we are ashamed of. It carries our rage, our envy, our arrogance, our lust, our cowardice. But also, strangely, it holds our creative fire, our strength, our truth. It is not evil. It is merely everything we are not yet conscious of, and when we do not face it, it acts without our consent. It hijacks the wheel while we believe we're in control. This is why the so-called innocent can become so dangerous, because they are unconscious of the war within them, and therefore they project it onto others. They do not just dislike you, they make you the carrier of everything they hate about themselves, and they believe it. That is the most terrifying part, they believe it. Have you ever felt it? That strange disconnect when someone accuses you of something so wildly misaligned with your truth that it leaves you speechless. That eerie sensation that you've been mistaken for someone else, cast into a role you never auditioned for. This is shadow projection. And when it comes from someone who believes in their innocence, their virtue, their absolute moral clarity, beware. Because the ones who refuse to confront their own darkness will see it in everyone else. And they will punish you for it. They will rally others to join them, convinced of their goodness, certain that you are the threat. But you are not the threat. You are the mirror, Jung said. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. But it does not only direct our lives, it distorts our perception of others. It turns friends into enemies, truth into threat, reflection into evil. And when an individual is completely possessed by this disowned part of themselves, when they mistake their mask for their soul, their virtue for their wholeness, they become a vessel for something archetypal, something far older than the self. The innocent become possessed by the archetype of the judge, the martyr, the savior. And in doing so, they lose all capacity for reflection, for doubt, for empathy. This is not a conscious choice. It is an unconscious takeover. The ego, fragile and desperate for certainty, allies itself with the most luminous image it can find, the good person. And then it begins to attack everything that threatens that image, you, your truth, your boundaries, your autonomy. The possessed do not listen. They proclaim. They do not see you. They see their projection. They are no longer present as human beings. They have become mouthpieces for an inner split. They refuse to heal. But make no mistake, this does not make them evil. It makes them lost, dangerously lost, and tragically so. Because the path to wholeness is always open. But the more tightly we cling to the illusion of our innocence, the more viciously we attack anything that reminds us we are not whole. The most dangerous people are the ones who need to believe they are always right, because rightness becomes their shield, and anything that pierces it, even love, even truth, becomes an enemy. And so the world is filled with smiling masks, with polished personas that say all the right things, that play all the right roles. But behind them, silence, emptiness, repression. And when that persona is threatened, the shadow erupts. Not as violence, perhaps, not as open cruelty, but as coldness, as subtle sabotage, as moral superiority, as manipulation so refined that you begin to question your own sanity. Do not be fooled by smile. Do not mistake good behavior for integrity. The persona, Jung said, is the mask we wear to survive the world. But when we forget, it is a mask. When we believe it is who we truly are, we betray the soul. And that betrayal has consequences. We cannot cut off parts of ourselves without becoming possessed by them. The more we deny, the more those denied parts rule us from the shadows. And the ones who deny the most, who have built entire lives around the image of perfection, are the most ruled by what they cannot see. You might think this is about other people, but it is not. It never is. The shadow you fear in them is the same shadow you hide from in yourself. We all have it. We are all capable of projection, of self-deception, of cruelty, masquerading as care. The only difference is awareness. Are you willing to look? Are you willing to descend into the underworld of your own soul to meet the monsters you've disowned? To reclaim the parts of yourself you once banished to survive? Because that is the only way out. An integration. The alchemical process of turning lead into gold, shadow into strength, wound into wisdom. The hero's journey is not a march toward the light, it is a descent into the dark. It begins when we stop running from the parts of ourselves we were taught to fear. When we sit with them, speak with them, understand them, when we say, I see you, I won't banish you anymore. You are part of me. When you see this sign in someone, run. Jung was right. There are signs the soul notices long before the mind does. A flicker in the eyes, a strange stillness behind the smile, a warmth that feels off. We've all felt it, haven't we? That sudden chill in the presence of someone who appears by all accounts perfectly normal, charming even. And yet something inside recoils, something ancient, something instinctual. Carl Jung understood this sensation not as paranoia, but as a signal from the unconscious alerting us to a psychic dissonance. Too subtle for reason to grasp, but too dangerous to ignore. It is not always the violent or the loud who harm us most. It is often the soft, the agreeable, the ones who say all the right things while hiding a darkness even they cannot see. This is the great danger of psychological blindness. The inability to recognize one's own shadow creates a person capable of projecting it with terrifying precision onto others. And when that happens, when someone sees their own denied darkness in you and believes it is real, you are no longer speaking to a person. You are facing a mirror in which they fight themselves, and you are merely the battleground. Jung warned that people who refuse to integrate their shadow inevitably become possessed by it, not in the sense of demonic fiction, but in the raw human sense of being overtaken by what they do not know about themselves. And so they become moral crusaders, spiritual performers, or harmless neighbors who suddenly explode in confusion, bitterness, or false accusations. The sign you must look for, the one that cannot be faked, is the total conviction in their perception of you, even when it contradicts all reality. They do not ask. They do not wonder. They know. They know who you are, what you meant, what you're trying to do. Except it's not you they're seeing. It's a character created by their unconscious, a hallucination rooted not in truth, but in everything they have disowned. And when that sign appears, when you feel the eerie certainty of someone seeing something in you that does not belong to you, run, not because they are evil, but because they are no longer seeing with human eyes. This is the phenomenon Jung called shadow projection, and it is the most insidious mechanism of the unconscious. The shadow contains all we cannot accept about ourselves: rage, envy, lust, cowardice, hunger for power. But it also contains our gold, our unclaimed power, our forgotten beauty, our buried truths. The problem is not that we have a shadow. The problem is pretending we don't, because when we do, we unconsciously assign it to others. We see liars where there is honesty, manipulators where there is clarity, threats where there is peace. And in doing so, we become dangerous without knowing it. The kind of danger that destroys reputations under the guise of moral clarity. The kind that ruins relationships while claiming to protect boundaries. The kind that convinces others to isolate the innocent, to silence the misunderstood, to burn the truth at the altar of psychological illusion. It is not always the projection itself that wounds most. It is the certainty behind it. Jung wrote that conviction is often a sign that the unconscious is speaking through us, because the conscious ego is never completely certain. It doubts, it reflects, it opens space for nuance. But the unconscious does not. When someone accuses you with perfect clarity of something that lives only in their mind, and they cannot be moved by facts, by feelings, by connection, you are not dealing with a person's, you are dealing with a pattern. An autonomous psychic complex that has hijacked the self and turned you into its enemy. This is the moment to walk away. Because anything you say, anything you do, will be interpreted through the lens of their shadow. And you cannot reason with what was never rational to begin with. Ancient traditions knew this, long before Jung gave it language. The Gnostics spoke of archons, psychic entities, that distort perception. The Buddhists warned of the delusions of the mind when it clings to false views. The Christian mystics called it the veil of pride, the refusal to see one's own sin in the pursuit of purity. Jung simply showed us that these ancient truths are not religious metaphors. They are psychological facts, and the danger is real, because those possessed by their shadow do not act as individuals anymore. They act as archetypes: the righteous accuser, the moral judge, the wounded victim, the heroic savior, and each role blinds them further to their own complexity. They become flatter, simpler, more certain, and more dangerous. We have been taught to fear anger, to fear cruelty, to fear the obviously unstable. But Jung taught us to fear certainty, not the grounded kind that comes from wisdom, but the sharp, inflexible kind that brooks no opposition. Because that is where possession lives. That is where the unconscious shouts. That is where people become mouthpieces for the parts of themselves they cannot face. And those parts, when denied, become cruel. Not because they are evil, but because they have no voice. And what is not voiced becomes distorted, What is not seen becomes projected. What is not integrated becomes weaponized. You will know this person not by how loud they speak, but by how immune they are to contradiction. You will know them not by their anger, but by their righteousness. You will feel it a tightening in your gut, a fog around your clarity, a pressure to apologize for something you didn't do. That is the moment to remember yourself. Do not fight their illusion. Do not try to correct it. Because when someone is deep in projection, your truth becomes irrelevant. You are no longer a person to them, you are a symbol, a scapegoat, an actor in a story that started long before you arrived. A character born not from your actions, but from their unhealed wounds. The silent war within shadow projection explained. There is a war happening inside you. Not the kind with banners or bloodshed, but a war older than language, older than thought itself. It is the war between what you know and what you refuse to know, between who you think you are and everything you've buried to become that person. It is a silent war invisible to the world, but deafening in the soul. Carl Jung called it the confrontation with the shadow, the hidden self or the disowned twin, the unacknowledged face that follows us wherever we go. Not because it wishes to haunt us, but because it is us, rejected, abandoned, locked in the basement of the psyche and left to rot. But nothing truly dies in the unconscious. It festers, it transforms, it waits, and one day it speaks not through your voice, but through someone else's. That is the terrible power of projection. When the parts of yourself you will not claim begin to show up in the faces of strangers, in the words of loved ones, in the imagined motives of people who mean you no harm, you think it's them. It's not. It's you. And that realization is where everything begins to change. Jung did not see the shadow as evil. He saw it as natural, inevitable. The shadow is not the villain of your story. It is the part you were forced to abandon to survive. The rage you weren't allowed to feel. The desire you were told to suppress. The brilliance you were told to dim. The truth you were told to forget. Every unlived life, every unrealized instinct, every silenced voice within you gathers in that subterranean chamber, gaining force with every denial. But the psyche is not passive. What is repressed seeks expression. What is ignored seeks voice. And if you will not meet the shadow within, it will meet you without. That is projection. It is the psyche's last desperate attempt to make the invisible visible, to force you to see what you refuse to own. Imagine this. You meet someone. There's nothing wrong, but something inside you reacts strongly. Too strongly, you feel irritated, threatened, disgusted, jealous, afraid. And it doesn't make sense. They haven't done anything. And yet you feel as if they have wounded something primal inside you. That is not intuition. That is the shadow. That is the psychic mirror reflecting what lies unseen in you. But we don't see it that way. We say that person is arrogant. We don't say that person mirrors the confidence I repress in myself. We say that person is manipulative. We don't say that person mirrors the part of me that wants control, but is too ashamed to admit it. Projection is not a lie. It's a displacement, a misdirection of truth. It is real emotion, but directed at the wrong target. And this is where the war begins to hurt the world around us. The danger is not that we project, we all do. The danger is that we believe our projections, that we mistake the shadow for the world, that we crucify others for sins we have not confessed in ourselves. Wars have begun this way. Families have shattered this way. Lovers have betrayed each other under the illusion of imagined offenses Jung understood. That projection is the root of human conflict. We do not see others as they are. We see them as we are. And unless we make the unconscious conscious, we will continue to fight phantoms while calling ourselves righteous. This is the silent war within. A war that externalizes our internal chaos, that demands others carry what we cannot, that turns friends into enemies and lovers into strangers. But the war can end. And it begins not with battle, but with surrender. The surrender of the ego's illusion that it is whole, that it is right, that it is pure. To confront the shadow is to admit we are not who we pretend to be, that we are more and less, that we are capable of everything we've judged, that the same darkness we fear in others lives in us too. This is not shameful. This is liberation. Because once you see your shadow, it no longer controls you. You no longer need to project it. You can reclaim it, reintegrate it, and become whole. Wholeness is not perfection, it is integration. It is the marriage of opposites within the sacred union of light and dark, masculine and feminine, heaven and hell. Jung called this individuation the path of becoming who you truly are, by embracing all that you are, not just the parts you like, but the parts you feared, avoided, and cast into the underworld of your psyche. The Greeks called this descent katabasis, a necessary journey into the underworld to recover lost fragments of the soul. It is not a metaphor. It is a psychic necessity. The myths knew this. So did the shamans, the mystics, the poets. Every authentic path to wholeness requires us to face the part of ourselves that has been cast out. And projection is the map. Every person who triggers you, every trait you cannot stand. Every reaction that feels disproportionate is an arrow pointing to your inner exile. But this journey is not easy, because the shadow does not yield to willpower. It does not dissolve in theory. It must be faced, sat with, held, understood. It must be dialogued with, not slain. The modern world teaches us to kill our demons. Jung taught us to listen to them, to learn their names, to hear their pain. Because every demon is a fragment of ourselves, longing to come home. And when we refuse that homecoming, the demon seeks form elsewhere, in projection, in addiction, in blame, in violence. The most dangerous people are not the ones who know they carry darkness. It is the ones who deny it, who believe they are only light. Because they are blind to the storm gathering behind their eyes, they walk the world with a smile and a sword they don't know they're holding. They call it protection. They call it truth. But it is a wound swinging wildly, cutting those who dare to reflect them. You will know them by their certainty, their moral superiority, their inability to doubt themselves. You will feel the chill, the dissonance, the weight of something not said. That is the presence of the shadow, hidden even from its host. The truth about the people who always think they're good. The greatest illusion is not in thinking we are bad. It is in believing we are only good. For the one who knows they are flawed can change. The one who knows they are broken can heal. But the one who clings to goodness, like a shield, who builds their identity on the foundation of moral superiorities, is the one most possessed by what they cannot see. Carl Jung understood this paradox better than anyone. He knew that evil doesn't always wear a monstrous face. It often hides behind smiles, behind righteous words, behind hands that tremble with sincerity. The people who always think they are good are not harmless. They are dangerous, not because they intend harm, but because they have exiled every trace of darkness from their self-image. And in doing so, they have become blind, not just to themselves, but to the truth. And when you are blind to your shadow, you will inevitably see it in everyone else. The unconscious does not disappear simply because we deny it. It deepens, it hardens, it festers, it watches. And when it cannot enter through the front door, it enters through the back, through projection, through judgment, through certainty, disguised as care. This is the tragedy of the overly good. They do not lie, they believe, and that is what makes them so convincing, so disarming, so profoundly difficult to awaken. The archetype of the good person is seductive. It promises safety, belonging, innocence. But like all archetypes, when it is identified with too closely, it becomes a trap, a prison built of light, too blinding to reveal the darkness it contains. And so the good man becomes the punisher. The good woman becomes the martyr. And they will destroy what threatens their image, even if it is the truth. We must understand this. The more we cling to purity, the more violently we reject the parts of ourselves that don't fit the mold. And those parts do not die, they return. Not as awareness, but as distortion. The people who always think they are good cannot hold contradiction. They cannot tolerate ambiguity. They divide the world into clean lines, good and bad, right and wrong, victim and perpetrator. But the psyche is not clean. It is not polite. It is a wild forest of contradictions, a mythic labyrinth of opposites. To be whole is to live with that tension. To know that you are both sinner and saint creator and destroyer, wounded and wise. But those who deny one half will become ruled by it, and they will not know it. Jung called this psychic inflation, the ego swollen by identification with archetypal content. The person no longer sees themselves as a flawed human being. They become the embodiment of virtue, of divine insight, of moral clarity. And in this inflation, the shadow becomes monstrous, unbearable, unrecognizable. And so it is projected onto the lover, the friend, the stranger. They become the scapegoat. The embodiment of everything the good one cannot face in themselves. And yet this happens with a kind of unconscious elegance. No malice, no conscious deceit. Just the haunting certainty that they are right, that you are wrong, that their pain is sacred and yours is dangerous, that their truth is absolute and yours is delusion. And this is the abyss, because how do you argue with someone who believes their goodness is beyond question? The answer is, you don't. You walk away, because nothing is more frightening than someone who mistakes their ego for the divine. And that is what the shadow of the good person becomes, a divinity complex. They are not open to feedback, only worship. Not interested in reflection, only confirmation. And they believe with holy intensity that their suffering gives them insight into yours, that their trauma makes them the judge of your intentions, that their boundaries are sacred, while yours are selfish. And beneath it all lies the wound they will not touch. The pain they've buried so deeply that it now speaks in the voices of others, whispers through suspicion, lives behind every false accusation. It is not you they hate. It is the part of themselves they cannot allow to live. Jung warned that the brightest light casts the darkest shadow. And the people who carry the brightest image of themselves often cast shadows too large to recognize. The good teacher who cannot admit ignorance. The good partner who cannot admit resentment. The good parent who cannot admit control. They all become enslaved to the ideal of themselves. And in protecting that ideal, they become blind to the damage they cause. But wholeness does not come from ideals. It comes from integration. From saying, I am not only good, I am also selfish, angry, afraid. I am cruel when I am tired, controlling when I am scared, manipulative when I feel powerless. And none of this makes me evil. It makes me human. This is the truth the always good cannot face, that being good is not the same as being whole. To be whole is to love what you once buried, to sit with your own darkness and say, I see you. I know where you came from. I will not let you rule me, but I will not throw you away. Because whatever you exile, you become, and whatever you own, you transform. The path of individuation is not a climb toward the light. It is a descent into the depths, into the forgotten rooms of the psyche, into the ancestral wounds, the repressed rage, the unlived lives within. It is a return to what you once feared would ruin you, and the discovery that this fear was the illusion all along. Why you keep meeting the same person in different bodies. There are patterns in your life that speak louder than memory. They echo in silence, in déjà vu, in the eyes of strangers who feel too familiar. You tell yourself it's coincidence, that fate is cruel, that people are all the same. But deep down, something older knows this is not a curse from the outside. This is a message from the depths of your soul. Carl Jung knew this phenomenon intimately. He called it the compulsion to repeat, the unconscious drive, to recreate unresolved psychic dramas until they are made conscious. You do not keep meeting the same kind of person by accident. You are drawn magnetized toward the shape of your wound. And until you have faced what lies buried in that wound, you will keep encountering its mirror again and again in different names, different faces, different hands that touch you in the same way. They are not just people. They are symbols, archetypes rising from the collective depths to confront you with what you have not yet integrated. Your soul remembers what your mind forgets, and it calls you through attraction and aversion toward the unfinished chapters of your inner story. That lover who broke you but felt like home. That friend who betrayed you but somehow felt like family. That authority figure who made you feel invisible, and yet you sought their approval like air. These are not mere coincidences. These are psychic constellations. You are not just choosing people, you are reenacting patterns. And the pattern is not punishing you. It is trying to wake you up, because what you do not heal you will repeat, not because you are broken, but because your soul is desperate for wholeness. And it will keep drawing you into the same orbit again and again until you finally see the invisible thread that ties it all together, you. The unconscious does not speak in language. It speaks in symbols and attraction, in projections, in the gravitational pull toward familiar suffering. It repeats not to torment you, but to reveal you, to show you the face of the wound that shaped your lens of reality. And until you see that lens, you will not see clearly. You will call it love when it's longing. You will call it chemistry when it's trauma. You will call it fate when it's repetition. But the moment you recognize the pattern is the moment you gain power. Because in that recognition, the unconscious becomes conscious, and what was once destiny becomes choice. But this awakening comes at a cost. You must be willing to confront the shadow beneath the pattern, the part of you that accepted the unacceptable, that normalized pain, that mistook control for safety, abandonment for passion, silence for peace. The part of you that learned to survive by adapting to chaos and now calls it comfort. Jung knew that we are not shaped by what happens to us, but by how we respond to what happens to us. And the child in you, the one who was not seen, not heard, not held, found a way to survive. But survival is not wholeness. It is a mask, a fragment, a frozen version of you that keeps choosing familiar prisons because freedom feels foreign. So the unconscious creates loops. It draws in people who carry the same emotional frequency as the original wound. And you play out the same story: the longing, the loss, the confusion, the betrayal. But the roles may change. You may become the one who leaves, the one who disappoints, the one who manipulates. This is not a failure. This is the other side of the same archetype, because the psyche does not rest until it sees all angles of its myth. And the myth is always rooted in your shadow, the parts of you that were rejected, neglected, or exiled to the unconscious, not because they were evil, but because they were too much to bear at the time. But you are not that child anymore. You can bear it now. You must, because until you do, the pattern continues. The same story in different bodies, the same heartbreak wearing a new smile, the same goodbye written in invisible ink from the very beginning. Dreams often reveal what waking life hides. In dreams, you see the symbolic truth, the figures who morph into multiple people, the houses you've never visited but feel haunted, the repeated corridors, the lost voices Jung taught that dreams are compensatory. They balance what the conscious mind represses, so if your waking life is filled with repetition, your dreams may show you the key, the locked door, the forgotten memory, the unspoken grief. Follow them. Listen. Your psyche is not your enemy. It is your oldest teacher, and it will keep trying to get your attention through dreams, through symptoms, through relationships that crack you open until you finally say, "What is it that I have not yet faced in myself?" The hidden force that distorts every relationship. You do not see others as they are. You see them as you are. Every face you look into becomes a mirror. Every voice, an echo, every encounter, a reflection of the invisible architecture within your psyche. And yet, you move through the world believing you are meeting others, believing love is between two people, believing conflict is about what was said or unsaid. But the deeper truth is this: what you see in another is shaped by what you have not yet seen in yourself. This is the hidden force unconscious projection, a silent sculptor that bends reality to match your inner myths. A force that distorts not only how you relate, but why you relate, who you are drawn to, what you fear, and how you suffer. Carl Jung spent his life unveiling this truth that much of what we call love, resentment, jealousy, admiration, or hatred is not born from the other at all, but from within, from the unacknowledged, unmet, unhealed parts of the self. And as long as those parts remain unconscious, you are not relating, you are reenacting. Every relationship you enter is haunted by the shadows of your past, not because you are broken, but because the psyche remembers. It remembers what you needed and didn't receive. It remembers who you had to become to be loved, and who you had to suppress, and these memories are not always stored in words. They are stored in patterns, in attractions, in the thrill of someone's voice, in the ache of their absence, in the irrational intensity that makes no sense on the surface. That is not just desire. That is history, a history written in the language of archetypes and wounds. You fall in love and think it's magic. But what if the person who feels like home is only familiar because their emotional landscape mirrors your earliest conditioning? What if they don't complete you, but reflect what you've always longed to complete in yourself? The hidden force does not reveal itself directly. It wears masks. It whispers through assumptions. It edits reality to protect the ego from confrontation. When someone disappoints you, are they truly wrong? Or have they simply failed to fulfill a role you unconsciously cast them in? When someone criticizes you, are they truly cruel? Or have they awakened a dormant wound you've never dared to feel fully? Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. This is not metaphor. This is psychological law. Until you become aware of your projections, every relationship will serve as a stage for the drama within you. And those you love most will become the primary actors, not by choice, but by fate. Because what remains unconscious will not rest. It wants integration. It wants recognition. And it will keep appearing outside of you until you finally meet it inside. There is an ancient idea repeated in myth and ritual that every journey outward is a journey inward, psyche and eros, Shiva and Shakti, beauty and the beast. The beloved is always a mirror, a symbol, an image that activates the deeper architecture of the soul. But if you do not know the language of symbols, you will mistake the symbol for the source. You will worship the mirror instead of seeing yourself in it. And you will suffer, not because love is cruel, but because love is precise. It does not give you what you want. It gives you what you need to evolve. And sometimes what you need is not comfort. It is confrontation. You say you were betrayed, but who inside you allowed the betrayal to continue unspoken? You say you were abandoned. But what part of you abandoned itself long before anyone else could? You say you were unseen. But how many years have passed since you truly looked into your own eyes without flinching? These questions are not accusations. They are doorways, because the moment you take responsibility for your projections, not blame but responsibility, you become free. You reclaim the energy you have scattered across a lifetime of projections. You become whole, not by changing others, but by integrating the parts of yourself you once placed in them. The shadow doesn't hide it. Hunts, it waits in silence, not to disappear, but a strike. Not to be forgotten, but to be remembered in the worst way possible. You think the shadow hides, that it's passive, buried, dormant. But the truth is far more disturbing. The shadow doesn't hide it, hunts, it watches. It studies your every move, your every denial, your every moral mask and spiritual costume. It sharpens itself on your self-deception, and when you least expect it, it enters your life not as a nightmare, but as a decision, as a voice in your head, as the words you speak in a moment of rage and regret, as the desire you swore you were above. The shadow is not just what you repress, it is what you refuse to become conscious of. And when left unseen, it doesn't grow weaker, it grows sharper, smarter, more strategic. Because what is unconscious is not neutral. It is active, it has agency, it doesn't wait to be invited, it invades. Carl Jung saw this not as pathology, but as necessity. The shadow is not here to ruin you, it is here to complete you. But first, it must confront you. It must show you the face you've never looked at, the one you were conditioned to hate, to fear, to exile from your self-image, the face of the liar, the addict, the coward, the abuser, the manipulator, the narcissist. Not in them, in you, not because you are these things, but because you could be. And unless you acknowledge that potential, unless you hold it in the light of consciousness, you will unconsciously act it out. And you will swear you had good intentions, that you were only doing what was right, that they deserved it, that it wasn't your fault. This is how the shadow hunts through justification, through righteousness, through the story that keeps you good in your own eyes, while your actions contradict the very soul you claim to serve. The more virtuous your mask, the more cunning your shadow must become to survive. Because the psyche demands wholeness, it will not tolerate one-sidedness forever. And the more you cling to purity, the more violently you will project your darkness onto others. You'll see monsters everywhere except in the mirror. You'll destroy those who carry even a fragment of the traits you buried in yourself. You'll become the punisher, the accuser, the martyr, all in the name of moral clarity. But underneath it all, the shadow is laughing. Not because it is evil, but because it knows the truth that it is not your enemy. It is your missing piece. And until you reclaim it, you are not a full human being. You are a fractured persona desperately defending the illusion of goodness. There is no light without shadow. There is no ascent without descent. This is not spiritual poetry, it is psychic law. The deeper your unconscious, the darker your unlived life. And the darker it gets, the more it must be fed. Not with blood, but with projection, with drama, with sabotage, with conflict that seems to follow you. No matter how much you meditate, journal, or pretend you've healed. That's not bad luck. That's the shadow knocking on the door you refuse to open. And if you do not open it, it will blow it off the hinges because the unconscious is not optional. You either work with it or it works through you. And when it works through you, it doesn't ask permission. Jung warned us, what you resist not only persists, but grows in size. And the shadow is the greatest resistance of all, not because it's unbearable, but because it's unfamiliar. Because we were raised in a world that told us to shine, but never taught us how to burn. That told us to be kind, but never showed us how to hold our anger without shame. That praised obedience, but never honored instinct. That taught us to smile while dying inside. And so we became split, half light, half lie. And the shadow was born in that fracture, not as an intruder, but as the guardian of everything we were told to abandon. But here's the truth, they never taught you. The shadow doesn't want revenge. It wants recognition. It wants you to stop pretending. To stop performing, to stop living a half-life. Because it remembers the fire in your bones. It remembers what you gave up to be accepted. It remembers who you were before you were shamed into becoming who you are. And it's hunting not to kill you, but to wake you up. To drag you into the underworld of your own being and make you confront the parts of you that hold your power, your truth, your originality. And yes, your darkness too. Because only the one who has faced their shadow can be trusted with the light, the invisible mirror. When you mistake others for your shadow, there is a mirror that follows you everywhere, but it does not reflect your face. It reflects your soul, especially the parts of it you refuse to see. It has no glass, no frame, no silver backing. You do not recognize it as a mirror, because it shows up in the form of people. The ones you love, the ones you hate, the ones who trigger a firestorm in you for reasons you cannot explain. You think you're reacting to them, but you're not. You are reacting to a projection, an image of your own disowned self, cast like a shadow onto their form. Carl Jung called this phenomenon the projection of the shadow. And it is one of the most dangerous distortions of the human experience. Because when you mistake others for your shadow, you are not in relationship, you are in reflection. And what you fight in them is what you fear in yourself. The unconscious is not quiet. It speaks in repetition, in attraction, in irrational judgment, in emotional overreaction. And yet, because it does not use words, the ego pretends not to hear it, but the soul knows. It always knows. That person who makes your skin crawl, that person you feel unreasonably superior to that person you judge with an intensity that burns. These are not random encounters. They are signals, archetypal echoes, invitations from your inner world to finally witness what has been banished. But instead, you react. You moralize. You label. You push away. And with each rejection, you blind yourself further to the truth. You are not fighting them, you are fighting you. The invisible mirror does not lie, it simply reflects what your conscious mind cannot yet bear to hold: your rage, your desire, your envy, your chaos, your forgotten courage, your silenced voice, your unmet hunger to be seen, heard, loved without condition. These elements, when left unintegrated, do not vanish. They seek form. They seek expression. And if they are denied internally, they appear externally in the people who disturb your peace, in the relationships that won't resolve, in the patterns that seem to choose you. But nothing is choosing you. Your soul is calling you. and it will keep calling until you answer. We live in a culture that encourages projection, that rewards moral certainty and punishes introspection, that celebrates outrage and pathologizes self-reflection. And so we become reactive creatures possessed by our judgments, mistaking them for clarity. But as Jung warned, what you condemn in another often reveals what you have not yet understood in yourself. This is not about blame. This is about awakening. Because to see the mirror is to begin the great journey. Not away from others, but toward your own center, toward the cavern of your soul where your shadow lives. Waiting not for punishment, but for reunion. You think the person you despise is arrogant, selfish, cruel, but what if they carry the confidence you were taught to repress? What if their selfishness awakens the part of you that was never allowed to put yourself first? What if their cruelty is simply a distorted echo of the anger you swallowed to survive? The mirror is not exact. It is symbolic. It doesn't show you who you are. It shows you what you've buried, and the more unconscious the burial, the more distorted the projection. You don't just project traits. You project entire stories. You assign motives. You build characters. You rehearse your emotional scripts and cast them into the lives of others, and you swear it's real. You feel it in your bones, but what you feel is not truth. It is resonance. Resonance with the unresolved. Resonance with the pain that was never named. Resonance with the self that was never allowed to fully exist. To awaken is to turn toward the mirror, not with shame, but with courage. To say, what if this has nothing to do with them? What if they are simply the face my shadow wears to get my attention? What if this irritation, this judgment, this ache is the smoke and the fire is within me? This is the beginning of individuation, the sacred unraveling of illusions, the reclamation of the soul, the movement from blindness to sight. And once you begin to see, you cannot unsee. You begin to feel the shift, the softening, the space where once there was only rage, the curiosity where once there was only certainty, the humility that rises like mist from the ruins of projection. This is not weakness, this is power. The power of wholeness, the power of one who has seen their own darkness and no longer needs to find it in others. The mask so perfect, it destroys the soul. There is a mask so perfect, so seamless, so dazzling in its imitation of the ideal that even the soul forgets it is wearing it. It begins not as deception, but as survival. The child learns early to be loved is to be good. To be good is to be what others approve, and to be what others approve is to abandon what the heart whispers in solitude. So the mask is born not out of malice, but necessity. A mask that smiles when the spirit weeps, that obeys when the inner voice rebels, that performs virtue while burying the wild primal truth beneath layers of appropriateness. And with every repetition, every applause, every reward for being what we are not, the mask tightens. Until one day the mask forgets it is a mask, and we forget there was ever a face beneath it. Carl Jung warned us that the greatest danger to the soul is not darkness. It is identification with the persona. For when you become the role, you lose the player. You become the image you crafted to be accepted, admired, praised. But that image is not you. It is a mannequin sculpted from collective expectations, clothed in borrowed values, perfumed with the fragrance of conformity. And though it may be flawless to the world, it is hollow to the self because perfection is sterile. Perfection is lifeless. Perfection is the prison where authenticity goes to die. Beneath that flawless mask lies the shadow, the unlived life, the repressed truths, the disowned chaos. Every time you pretend to be okay, when you are not, the shadow grows stronger. Every time you agree to please when your soul screams, no, it grows darker. And this is the tragedy. The more perfectly you wear the mask, the more violently the soul will rebel, not always through grand explosions, but through silent erosion fatigue that no rest heals relationships, that feel ghostly achievements, that taste like ash. The soul does not die in fire. It dies in forgetfulness, but the world loves a good mask. The more you play the part, and the more they celebrate you. And slowly that celebration becomes intoxicating. You confuse the applause for love. You mistake validation for meaning, and you begin to fear your own reflection. Not because of what it shows, but because of what it does not. Where is the child who once dreamed without asking permission? Where is the instinct that once raged like a storm before it was tamed? Where is the voice that spoke from the gut, before it was trained to speak, only when spoken to lost, or worse, buried alive? The unconscious is not fooled. It remembers, it keeps every moment you abandoned your truth, locked away in symbols and dreams. It calls to you not in words, but in myth, in image, in crisis. The breakdown you fear is often the breakthrough you need, when the mask cracks, when life tears through the illusion you built. That is not failure, that is initiation. The collapse is not the end, it is the descent. The first step into the underworld, where the self waits like a forgotten god beneath the ruins of your persona. And make no mistake, the descent is brutal. To strip off the mask is to rip away everything you thought made you lovable, valuable, worthy. You will feel naked raw, unsheltered from the gaze of the world, and worse, the gaze of your own soul. But what waits there is not shame. It is truth, a truth wild and fierce and utterly unafraid of imperfection. The truth of who you were before you became what you thought the world wanted. That truth is the key to wholeness. The ancients knew this. In myth, the hero never becomes who they are. By staying in the village, they must leave. They must wander into the forest, face monsters, confront gods, wrestle with their own shadow. Only then can they return, not as who they were, but as who they have become. This is not metaphor, this is psychology in symbolic form. The dragon is your shadow, the labyrinth is your unconscious, the treasure is your true self. And the mask is the illusion you must destroy to begin. But we cling to the mask because it is beautiful, because it is familiar, because it has kept us safe. We fear that without it we will be unrecognizable, that those who love the role will not love the real. And perhaps they won't. But you were not born to be accepted. You were born to become. The path of individuation is not about being liked, it is about being real, being whole, being free. And freedom begins the moment you say, "This mask is killing me. I want my soul back." The anima and animus, those sacred inner opposites, also suffer when we wear the mask too tightly. The man who must always appear strong banishes his inner feminine. The woman who must always be pleasing rejects her inner masculine. These psychic fragments retreat into shadow, appearing in projection, in obsession, in distorted relationships. But when you peel away the persona, when you embrace your wholeness, these inner figures return not as enemies, but as allies. You no longer need to seek completion in another, because you have begun the sacred marriage within. To remove the mask is not to become less. It is to become more than you ever allowed yourself to be. It is to reclaim the exile, to welcome the outcast, to resurrect the divine spark you buried to survive. Yes, the mask served you, but it was never meant to be your skin. Let it fall, let it shatter, let the illusion die so the self may live. Beware the ones who never doubt themselves. Beware the ones who never doubt themselves, for they have made a god of certainty. And there is no cruelty more blind than the hand that believes it is holy. The one who walks without ever questioning the ground beneath them is not standing on truth. If they are floating on delusion, doubt is not a weakness. Doubt is the flicker of light that leaks through the cracks in the ego. It is the whisper of the unconscious that dares to interrupt the performance of the persona. It is the soul's subtle rebellion against the mask that smiles too perfectly. Those who never doubt have locked themselves inside a fortress of identity, welded shut every window through which the self might have entered, and in doing so, they have banished the very voice that could have saved them. There is a terrible arrogance in never looking inward. For what kind of person assumes that the surface is all there is, that the I they wear like a costume at the masquerade of life is the full story? No. The ego that never reflects becomes tyrannical. It projects its own darkness onto others. It condemns the shadow in the world because it refuses to see it within. This is how good people become dangerous. This is how righteousness curdles into violence. The man who believes himself pure becomes the executioner of everyone else's sin. The woman who thinks herself awakened is the first to crucify those still asleep. And all the while, their own unconscious festers unexamined and unclaimed like a ghost whispering from the basement of their psyche, begging to be seen. Carl Jung knew this well. He warned us not to become identical with the mask we wear. The persona is necessary. It lets us function in the world, allows us to play our roles. But when we mistake it for who we truly are, we become hollow as shell, a collection of performances. And worst of all, we start to believe that the performance is noble, that the image we show others is the truth, but the self, the true self lives beneath all this. It is not interested in performance. It is not concerned with appearance. It waits in silence, in shadow, in the wild lands of dreams and symbols. It speaks in archetypes and metaphors, not in applause or approval. And yet those who never doubt themselves never hear it, because to hear the self is to allow contradiction. It is to hold tension. It is to admit that what you have believed may no longer serve you. That what you condemn in others may live inside you. That what you fear most might be your teacher in disguise. The unconscious does not flatter. It does not bow to the ego's comfort. It arrives like a storm, like a mirror, like a snake in the garden. Hissing truths that shatter illusions, and only those humble enough to doubt themselves can receive it. In the one who doubts, there is still a doorway open. There is still the possibility of transformation. Doubt, when it is not avoidance, but sincere inquiry, is sacred. It is the crack in the shell of persona through which the light of individuation shines. And individuation. This is the real path. Not success, not perfection. Not being right, but wholeness, the integration of opposites. The union of conscious and unconscious, the meeting of shadow and light. This path does not ask you to be flawless. It asks you to be honest. It asks you to bring the pieces of yourself that have been exiled back into the circle. It asks you to stop pretending, to stop hiding, to stop believing your mask is all there is. But that requires courage, because when you begin to doubt yourself, truly doubt yourself, what falls apart first is everything you thought you were. The name, the role, the morality, the pride, the certainties, and from the rubble, something older and deeper begins to stir. A voice that does not speak in words, but in symbols. In dreams, in sudden memories, in the ache of déjà vu and the pull of fate. This is the self, and it does not speak to those who believe they already know who they are. The ones who never doubt themselves are not free. They are possessed by their own ego, enslaved by an identity they cannot question. And worse, they often become leaders, icons, influencers, because certainty sells. Confidence is addictive. But blind confidence, the kind that resists inner work, is the most seductive poison of all. It leads nations into war. It destroys families. It builds systems of power that feed on the illusion of righteousness, and all the while the true self, the voice of balance, of integration, of inner truth, remains buried beneath the mask of certainty. You must be different. You must doubt, not in despair but in reverence. You must kneel at the altar of your own contradictions and ask, what am I not seeing? You must turn inward into the fog, into the chaos, into the underworld of the soul. For it is there, and only there, that the unconscious will reveal its treasures. The shadow will not surrender to those who believe they are above it. It reveals itself to those willing to descend, willing to grieve, willing to confront the monster in the mirror and say, you are me too. And in that moment, something extraordinary happens. The inner war begins to dissolve. You stop fighting yourself. You stop pretending to be only light. And in embracing your shadow, you become whole. Not holy, not flawless, whole. This is what the ones who never doubt themselves never understand, that true strength is forged in self-confrontation. That real authority comes not from dominance, but from integration. That the greatest power is not in knowing, but in becoming.